Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Katherine Cullen, a writer and performer who's spending the summer with Britta Johnson remounting their 2017 play Stupidhead for Outside the March. First is a series of live audio broadcasts starting tomorrow, Wednesday, July 7th, and then as live in-person performances bookable on porches and backyards in Toronto from July 20th to August 1st. It's a pretty intriguing model, and you should definitely check it out. Just look for Stupidhead at OutsideTheMarch.ca. Katherine picked Bottle Rocket, the energetic 1996 indie that announced the arrival of three kids named Wes Anderson, Owen Wilson, and Luke Wilson into American cinema. Like most of Anderson's films, it's a movie about charismatic eccentrics limited by their own obsessions, in this case a small-time wannabe who wants to pull a heist, but a quarter century after its release, it's just as interesting for the elements the filmmaker didn't carry forward with him. You'll see. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I first saw Bottle Rocket in high school. I think I was like 16. And I think what I initially was drawn to was just sort of like how absurd these adults were. And I think that's something like my 16-year-old self related to. And I liked that they were sort of or at least Dignan in particular was so doggedly pursuing this sort of ridiculous dream of wanting to be a excellent robber, an excellent thief. And he was so clearly not excellent at it. And I think that made a strong impression because not to fully segue to Stupidhead, but just to tangentially so much of Stupidhead, I'm not a musical theater performer. I don't have a pretty singing voice, all of those things, but I still wanted to make this weird musical about, my feelings about having dyslexia, or more than that, feeling like you don't quite fit in, or that you're struggling with life in certain ways. And so it was cool to watch someone who struggled with life, but didn't actually let it truly stand in their way, to sort of doggedly pursue what they want in spite of not necessarily having all the tools to do it successfully. And what is success, I guess. And I really love how those characters live outside of societal norms in certain ways. And in ways I found really charming. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there is a single character. I'm just having rewatched it again after, I don't think I'd taken a look at it for at least 15 years, probably. I was really surprised to see there are no normal characters, right? The closest is Bob Mapplethorpe, which what a great name too.
I love that character. He's hilarious.
Yeah, he has a sense of what the world is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it constantly creates friction with everyone around him, which is great because he's clearly has no one else to play with, right? Yeah. He's just surrounds himself with these fantasists, people who have decided they're amoral outlaws while not being, I was trying to figure out how to put it, because it is the thing that defines so many of Wes Anderson's movies to me is that his characters operate along rigid codes, which are inexplicable. They don't, none of them has the words. Max Fisher can't articulate anything. He can just tell people what he wants. And he's insistent enough that people follow him. And that's clearly the same with Dignan, who he's going to get himself hurt or killed at every opportunity. He just endangers everything and everyone around him. Yeah. But he's a fucking innocent, right? That's his thing. He has that Owen Wilson idiot charm where you just want to see what happens next because he'll probably hurt himself more than anybody else.
Totally.
But he's it's not anti-charisma, it's genuine charisma. But what Wilson and Anderson do with that script and with him, he knows what he can get away with as an actor, I think, which is something a lot of young actors don't necessarily understand. And watching that performance now, Jesus, 25 years later, with all of the things that Wilson has done and all of the things that Anderson has done in the rearview mirror, it felt like it must have felt then, which is, how did you know you could get away with this? And how did this happen? And just why?
Yeah. Yeah. I also feel like when I watch his performance, Owen Wilson's performance, I feel like it's sort of like he's like a child who wants to play with other children,
Yeah.
except they're unfortunately all like technically adults, you know? And like there's that scene in the diner when it's like Dignan and Anthony, and Anthony's told Dignan that he knew Bob was going to leave with the car, and he's like drawing that picture of Inez with the horse and the like sparkles or whatever. And I was just like looking at that scene, and on Anthony's side, there's like a empty booth on like to the back of him, but on Dignan's side, there's two children just on his side, and I was like, oh, director's statement maybe, but like it's me, and that's like that's kind of all I have in terms of in-depth analysis. But I just sort of I just was like, oh yeah, he's totally, even though he's sort of so frustrating and makes such like kind of insane life choices, you love him because he is so childlike, and there is that sort of, as you said, like this innocence. And how can you not sort of like rally around him a little bit, you know?
Yeah. And even as it destroys everything around him, I mean, I was trying to figure out if he alienates people, but he doesn't. He just leaves that. He ditches them. He convinces himself that it's him who's walking away.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out whether the complete absence of parents is deliberate as a commentary, that, you know, they rob Anthony's mother's house, but we never see Anthony's mother. We see his sister, his kid sister, once as a truth teller.
Yeah, who's the most adult person in the entire movie.
Yeah, which was a real trope right around then too. And I was trying to figure out if it was commentary on stuff like Beautiful Girls, where Natalie Portman is the old soul. But I think it's just, I think they're supposed to be presented as equals. I think we're supposed to see that it's not that she's a grown-up, it's that Anthony isn't, right?
Yeah.
Like that he's indulgent of Dignan, and he gives him his escape at the beginning, and he lets him have things that are the right choice for Dignan, but the wrong choice for, you know, a healthy relationship with Dignan.
Yeah.
And his indulgence of him, it's like, you know, it's your 12-year-old friend telling you that you can get into an R-rated movie if you just follow his lead, right?
Yeah.
They've never stopped having that. They've never stopped relating to each other on that level. No,
and there's a way, and in that sense, it's like they both hold each other back. Certainly Dignan holds Anthony back, you know?
Yeah. And I think Anthony, by not encouraging Dignan to wake up, is holding him back too. Like it's absolutely a codependent thing that's going on between them. And it's really remarkable watching it again that nobody gets killed or hurt. Like we're even told specifically that Applejack gets out of the hospital. He just doesn't speak to them afterwards. That there are consequences, but nothing permanent. Yeah. And that also seems to fit Anderson's future worldview, because he really does withhold tragedy in so many of his movies. Like in Royal Tenenbaum, Ben Stiller's wife dies before the movie begins, and the rest of it is like Royal lives. We're told how Royal will die, but we don't see it. And his Life Aquatic is, again, it's about a past tragedy. It's about people living with the weight of stuff, but that's not true. He kills somebody at the end of Life. Okay, bad example. Right. But he's very, very specific about where he brings the hammer down. Yeah. And I think maybe more than anything, that's why people see his films as fantasy. I mean, now he's tilted off entirely into that world. Yeah. But the melancholy that underlies all of them comes from like the denial of death within the reality of the film, and also by the characters, by the people who, I mean, we don't even know if Anthony's dad's alive. We know it's his mom's house. Yeah. And maybe that's deliberate. I mean, there's no reason to believe anything in this film isn't deliberate, given how obsessive a filmmaker Anderson is. Yeah. But as a film about people clinging to each other, I think it's one of his purest. It's actually my favorite Wes Anderson movie. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was also the first Wes Anderson movie I ever saw. So it's one of those things where you're like, your loyalty sort of can kind of glom onto the first movie of the director's work. But I agree. I think there's a lot of just like,
I think there's just like the particular whimsy of Bottle Rocket is something that I really like glommed onto. And you're right. Like, I mean, I'm just thinking like Dignan goes to jail at the end, but he doesn't seem hard done by it. Like he's sort of perfectly comfortable there. And it's not, he's just as happy in jail, sort of imagining his escape than he is in the outside world, and maybe even happier,
Yeah.
And it's curious too, to me, to sort of think about like the ways that Dignan in particular, but I guess all of like Anthony and Bob are trying to like make their mark on the world. Like why, like they want to feel like they're important in some way. But it's like so half-assed and so like ridiculous, and childlike. And they all have things, I think, in their lives that make them feel completely unimportant or like maybe that they are a bit nothing.
Yeah. Well, Bob's brother, Future
Sure.
Man, which is such a great self-imposed nickname,
Yeah.
and so clearly his own thing.
Yeah.
Tells people that Bob has run away from home, and Bob has that great moment of, I'm 26. I didn't run away from home. But, I have a brother who's 19 months younger than me. And I think we still, like, we're in our 50s and we still snap into relating to each other that way. And I get that. That feels incredibly observant of the film, to just constantly show us how the world keeps them younger or smaller than they feel like they should be. And Dignan, obviously, like, he has no parents that we see. He has no other friends. And he is stuck in this place.
Yeah, there's like serious arrested development with him, and no sort of like, seems like there's no desire for any kind of romantic relationships or like really anything outside this like little club that he's trying to create for himself.
He doesn't want to go out with them. He doesn't want to go to the bar with them. When he does go, he picks a fight with people and gets himself beaten up.
Yeah.
There's that little moment where Rocky, translating, says, tell him she loves you.
Yeah.
Tell him I love you. And he is completely flummoxed. Like it's a great performance choice, I have to say, from Owen Wilson.
Yeah.
The way he just stops dead and thinks.
Yeah.
And tries to make it make sense.
Yeah, like no, in that way too, like you're sort of reminded of his self-absorption. Like he doesn't think beyond, right? Of course, like Inez, Anthony, like this relationship I've been witnessing this entire time. Like he is, he's really self-absorbed. All the characters are to some extent, for sure, but Dignan, I would say, like, is the most self-absorbed, and yet, like, is so charming and kind of lovable. But
it's that Don Quixote quality, right? Like he's the hero of his own story, which he is making up as he goes, at the expense of everyone else's stories. But even when he's threatening people at gunpoint, you somehow don't. That was the first time through. I was like, okay, somebody's going to get shot. That gun is going to go off. We've seen them playing with it for the entire, like, that's the Chekhov principle. It's going to happen. Someone's going to get killed. It's probably going to be Dignan. He will be the thing that the movie sacrifices to teach Anthony a lesson. But it doesn't happen. Like he sacrifices himself by letting the cops chase him. But it's not a sacrifice then either. It's just him completing his destiny of being this outlaw that he thinks he is.
Yeah. Which is interesting. Like, why? Because he seems like it is a bit sort of interesting to like, I wonder about why he's so obsessed with like breaking the law and being this outlaw when he's kind of ultimately this sort of like tender, like a highly sensitive, like man-child, it just sort of feels like there's nothing about him that feels like hardened or like cynical. So it's interesting what he's so obsessed with becoming this, this like criminal mastermind.
Yeah. Well, it's like the guy who buys a hat in high school and that's his identity. It doesn't, you can't tell him that a hat isn't an identity. It's a great hat. You can't see past it.
Totally. And, and I was just thinking too, like, if Dignan's someone who like, I remember at one point he mentions that they can't rob his house because it's Mom and Craig. And so like, there's no real father figure there. And then, Mr. Henry comes into his life and is this sort of like charismatic, powerful man. You sort of think, oh, Dignan's really just trying to be trying to win over Mr. Henry's affections, the sort of father figure that maybe he never had.
Yeah. And also get taken by him, like how this is not going to work. And I don't know that the first time through I could see through Khan. I was watching him again this time and trying to see if there are tells, but it's not that kind of movie, right? I think we're supposed to be as blindsided by it as the characters are, that he's just clearly a weird guy who's using Dignan. But at first it seems like they have a common purpose. And then not even gradually, then we're just sort of shocked where there's that cut to them loading the moving truck up. And it's like, oh, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that reveal. It's so clever.
He's not even sorry.
No, it's just like you think Mr. Henry's like fully on their side. And, and when he stands up to Future Man on behalf of Bob in the country club, you're like, oh, yes. This is the father that they all need to sort of like, wrangle them all in and make them feel cared for. And then he completely abandons them in the worst way.
Yeah, that grand piano must have been worth at least $10,000. It's such a great line too, because it's so completely uninformed. I mean, I'm sure even in 1996, grand pianos cost more than that.
Yeah, no, I know.
But it just tells you how small time Dignan is on so many levels.
Yeah.
So when I first saw it, it was in 96. It was the theatrical, it must have been a preview screening, I guess. And it was just one of those movies where every expectation I had went sideways into it. It's just, this is going to be another, because it felt like an answer film to a lot of the post-Tarantino neo-noir stuff. And weirdly enough, there have been a couple of movies in the last few weeks on the show that deal with similar waves, where just the thing came along because of this moment that someone else was doing, and it rode a wave that it doesn't belong to. Like Bottle Rocket is a film about people who watch Tarantino movies, except that there are no movies in the film. Like these characters don't sit around watching movies, but Dignan would. Like he would have grown up on, or not grown up, it was only 4 years ago, but he would have watched Reservoir Dogs and come away inspired. And weirdly enough, if you've seen the short film that Anderson and Wilson made.
Yeah, I've never seen. I've always wanted to, though.
Yeah, it's on the Criterion Blu-ray, and I'm sure it's floating around on their channel now or something. But it's black and white. It is almost verite style. It's all handheld. It's nothing like you would expect from Wes Anderson as we now know him. But it feels like Clerks. Like it's just a bunch of guys hanging out and talking. They couldn't afford to shoot the robbery of the bookstore, so they shot around it and changed the way it's like the three guys. It's the same three actors, the Wilsons and Musgrave, Robert Musgrave. Is it?
I think so.
Bob. The three of them sitting outside a burger joint talking about it.
Okay.
But it feels like, and also because it was made in 1993 and everybody's younger, it really feels like it came right out of the Kevin Smith stream instead of the Tarantino stream. And then when they made the movie, it's more Tarantinoized because it's, chatty criminals, except that it's completely different. And now it feels like it's a completely original, different evolution of that thing, like a mutation almost. Yeah. But I remember at the time wrestling to make sense of it, because it did have chatty people talking about heists, and it is kind of a heist movie in that it delivers one in the end. It just doesn't go well at all. And it seemed like such an outlier even then. And now now it feels different because you watch it in the rear view of all of Anderson's subsequent films, and there are moments where there's a centered image, or you get a shot of Dignan's notebook with the precise organizational thing that Anderson loves so much, and you're like, oh yeah, Wes Anderson. And then it goes on to handheld tracking shots and unbalanced compositions and things that don't feel like Wes Anderson at all. So at the time, it didn't feel like it belonged to Tarantino, and now weirdly, it feels like it doesn't belong to Anderson. Yeah, I see that for sure. And I think that's partly why I like it so much too, because it feels like it's in this like kind of no man's land a little bit. And it's not like, I mean, I like Wes Anderson films. I wouldn't say I'm like a massive Wes Anderson fan, but I totally like loved Rushmore, Tannenbaums. I haven't seen a lot of the more recent ones, but I think I like that it's not as stylized as some of his later films are, because it's like finding itself in certain ways, but it's still its own aesthetic. Yeah.
And you have to sort of catch up to what it's trying to be, or what it is. And you're sort of always trying to figure out, is this a weird comedy? Is this like, like, what is this? And I think I really like that, because there's something really like honest about it to me.
Yeah. The one thing that feels consistent with the rest of his films is that his musical choices are so precise and so like they're not retro, they're archival in a way that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
Just as like Rushmore was scored with mod music.
Yeah.
This film is referencing love song, like songs by the band Love and a bunch of other era appropriate artists. There's a Rolling Stones track, which amazes me because I guess when you have James L. Brooks behind you, you can get that, but it seems like it would have been beyond.
How did they afford it? I love the soundtrack to Bottle Rocket. That's actually one of the things I love so much about that movie is the soundtrack. And it's always the same. It's not always the same person, the same man, the same guy.
Oh, the score, Mark Mothersbaugh. The
score. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Did most of his films right up until, I think the last one he did was, maybe it was Moonrise Kingdom, or maybe that's when they switched over to Desplat, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, Mothersbaugh, the score for Tenenbaums and for Rushmore in particular, I love them so much. But good. You can feel their relationship is here too. It's fully formed.
Yeah. No, I love the landscape. Like I love that they're in this like deserty area, and there's something like where are they? Where is the movie set?
Dallas.
It's Texas. It's set in Dallas.
Yeah, or in and around Dallas. They never call attention to it, but the police cars at the very end have DFW on them.
Oh, okay, because they never explicitly say where they are, but you can, if you pay close enough attention, clearly you can figure it out.
Yeah, the border isn't far, right? There's a large Spanish-speaking Latino influence. There are people, and that's the other thing. He's always had a blind spot for minorities, or not a blind spot, but he seems less concerned with them as characters, as people. Like the treatment of Danny Glover's character in Tenenbaums sort of is emblematic of this weird thing he has, and it's kind of like a patrician regard for people of color. This is the movie where you don't see that. It feels like Inez is at least a three-dimensional character, and then maybe Rocky has some moments too where he gets to be a person instead of a character point for other people, like a development point for everybody else. Yeah,
precisely. I was kind of like reflecting on that this time around, because it has been so long since I've seen it, but I was really trying to pay close attention to how Inez's character is treated, and Rocky as well. And I did feel like you get different pieces of her and different aspects of her, like she, as you said, is three-dimensional, and their love story is three-dimensional. Anthony's and Inez's, like, it doesn't feel like this sort of like him projecting necessarily all this stuff onto her, maybe initially, but it seems like they actually do find each other truly and see each other truly throughout the film.
Yeah, there's definitely a power imbalance when they first meet.
Exactly.
And the way he follows her around it's just short of creepy. Like it's inappropriate.
Yeah.
But I think, again, with as with Dignan's innocence, Anthony is genuine. And by the time he's helping her fluff pillows and sort of wandering around with her like a puppy, it feels like she's holding all the cards. Like there's a very, very subtle switch by the time they make it to the third room that they're making up that day.
Yeah.
Where she's in charge. And you can sort of see it in Lumi Cavazza's performance, where she isn't totally sure what to do with this guy and then gradually warms to him.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a very like childlike view of how relationships work too. So in a weird way, the film is maintaining that vibe. Like I couldn't tell if she was recapturing a more innocent flirtation or if she just enjoys the attention. But yeah, Inez is steering within 20 minutes of them meeting.
Absolutely. And when she like tells him very frankly she's not going with him, and he doesn't, like, he's upset, but he respects her her desires and leaves. Like there isn't any sort of like yeah, it feels like at that point they're both like individuals with their own desires, and as upset as he is, he like respects her wishes. So I felt like I felt like that relationship was actually quite sweet, and at least like relatively well like teased out for both of them.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I recently kind of rewatched Rushmore, which I hadn't in a long time, and I was like, oh, there's some stuff here that's like really creepy. In terms of Max and the teacher that he pursues, like this didn't age well.
Well, I was gonna say, like almost immediately after this film, his take on sexuality and power dynamics and relationships, it's very sour very fast.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ugliness around the relationships in Royal Tenenbaums, and there's a whole thing that isn't even in I can't remember the hotel.
Oh, Grand Budapest Hotel.
No. That's actually where it gets back to being sweet again. Weirdly enough. No, there was a short film included with the Darjeeling Limited.
Okay.
That introduces Natalie Portman as Jason Schwartzman's girlfriend, and it's just them having uncomfortable sex in a hotel room and talking, and it's really weird. And it sets up a lot of the problems that Schwartzman has, and clearly it was designed as the prologue and then cut and released separately. It's on the Blu-ray, and it played with it theatrically. But it's just one of those things where you think, how does the filmmaker perceive romance? How does he see a romantic gesture?
Yeah.
And then you see something like Moonrise Kingdom, which is, again, it's a return to the innocence of Bottle Rocket. And that sort of sets up the relationships or the romance between Tony Revolori and Saoirse Ronan in the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is also sweet and very, very tragic. But he kind of it felt like he had to purge all that stuff to get back to delicacy again. And maybe there was a bad relationship. I don't know. But there's 10 years where he's just making really unpleasant choices for his characters' romantic lives. And none of that is in Bottle Rocket, which is sort of lovely.
Yeah, I think that's also like there's something uncomplicated about Bottle Rocket, which again, I like. And I was like, I was a bit worried when I wanted to rewatch it for our chat. And I was like, oh God, what if there's stuff in it that like, I find out it was like, oh, that sucks. Like I forgot about that. Or like, I didn't think critically about that at the time, but rewatching it, I felt like largely it all kind of holds up. So that was good.
It's good. Yeah, no, it's always a relief to revisit something that's, older than 5 years and realize it hasn't gone sour or dated horribly. I mean, I think the stuff in Rushmore is deliberate. I mean, I think we're supposed to see that Max is immature in his pursuit of Rosemary. But it gets ugly. Like it gets really tense and unpleasant, especially when she stands up to him and dresses him down with, what would you tell your friends? That's so painful.
I know. And I couldn't figure out if the movie was actually trying to like comment on that, like, more critically, or if it's sort of only going so deep with how it understands how toxic that dynamic is. Like, that's what I sort of feel like. I don't quite know where the director is sitting with this, because Max is so sort of like, well, because he's like the protagonist.
Yeah. And in a weird way, the storyteller. I mean, I think the fact that it opens and closes with those curtains is telling us that we're watching a Max Fisher production. Like this is his memoir. Yeah. So he sees it all as defensively and personally as you would imagine he would see it. But it's a difficult line to walk aesthetically to get the audience to understand that and to maintain it for the full running time. Sometimes it just does not land. But yeah, Rushmore. Oh, I love it so much. I refuse to say a bad thing about it. But there is stuff in there that is absolutely from the outside perspective. If you were Max's dad, you'd be horrified. Yeah. To know what he was doing and what was going on and how he saw other people. And it is something that recurs in Anderson's movies. So yeah, maybe it was Wilson's influence in Bottle Rocket that just kept it sweeter. Yeah, because he co-wrote. How many did he co? He co-wrote the first three: Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, and Tenenbaums. Yeah. I think after that they splintered. Like Wilson was just. I think it was just because Wilson was making movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
became a movie star, which again, from this, there's no question he's going to be one. It's kind of weird that Luke became one because he's not that he's bad, but he's so recessive as an actor in this film that Owen blows him away.
Yeah.
But they both managed to have good careers. And yeah, watching Owen Wilson now show up in Marvel's Loki, it's just, and be perfectly cast for what he's doing there. It's just such a strange, I did not think that the guy from Bottle Rocket would end up here.
I know, in this like indie, like, strange, like where he's sort of this anti-hero. Yeah. No, I know, me neither. He's so charming in that movie. So charming. You were talking about the Wilson brothers, and then funny to me as well that Future Man is also their third brother.
That's right. I always forget that because he doesn't quite look like them.
I know, he's a bit of a slightly different Wilson, a not famous Wilson. He is their brother.
He's the Ted Hemsworth.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's also why I like Bottle Rocket. Is it feels like, because it's the beginning of all of their trajectories, like Wes Anderson, the Wilsons, it just, there's something about it that feels like a family affair. Like it's sort of like people sort of scrappily working to like get a vision out there. And there's something kind of like nice about that, because it's the very first thing that they really did that kind of made a big mark. So I think that's also why I like it too.
Yeah, it does feel like a collaborative act of love. Like it couldn't have happened if everyone didn't really try to believe in it and nurture it and get over the obvious shortcomings. Like they didn't have a lot of money and they wanted to shoot it in anamorphic, but the tests didn't work to their satisfaction. There's a whole section on the Criterion just about it. And it's just a great film school for people who are starting out on the same level. But they also had James L. Brooks and Richard Sakai, who at the time were producing The Simpsons and just commissioning things left and right because they could. And Polly Platt, who was one of the essential believers in the project in the first place. And it nurtured them. It allowed them to be as eccentric as they wanted and even risk failure and make this tiny little indie that now, has launched all these other careers.
What do you think it's like ultimately about? What do you think the movie's sort of like saying?
I think
you have a sense?
I think if anything, it's about the obvious thing is toxic masculinity, which it's not about. I think that's the dodge. I think it's about people who have far too much confidence and no preparation. And there is that certain white privilege thing of, I'm going to be an outlaw because I'm the white guy and no one's going to bother me, that Dylan carries with him. Like he thinks he's invisible and he kind of is. Yeah. But he thinks it's because he's so clever, and it's really because he's not threatening.
Yeah, like he runs from the cops at the end of that movie, and like they do nothing. I mean, they run after him, but they don't shoot him. They don't. Yeah, they don't.
They beat the snot out of him at the end, but that's more out of irritation, I think, than anything else. But there is a moment. I think it's deliberate, given the way Anderson handles racial questions in other movies. I don't know that it is, but I want it to be. Where at the very end, when Dignan is going back into to prison, like where he's returning after the visitation, the guy behind him is an older black man who clearly is not putting up with any of this shit. He's not angry, but he's tired. And maybe it's just that the extra was hot that day, but it reads like a larger commentary on Dignan's aspirations and how foolish they are, because this guy's in prison for probably a long time and probably for nothing. Yeah. If he's in the same place as Dignan, who was a minimum security idiot, no matter what, right? Yeah. He's not going to hard time anywhere. Yeah. And that seemed to say more than the movie knows it's saying, or it's just incredibly subtle and deliberate. And maybe it's James L. Brooks saying, you need to have a commentary. Yeah. But it felt like if that's the take he kept it for a reason. Yeah. I agree. Maybe I'm just clinging to it.
I think there's definitely something there, because it feels pointed in some way. It doesn't feel like it's an accident that, as you said, like that he's in the frame, and like that you can read expression off of him. Like it's that there is something sort of being communicated there. I guess the question is like, how intentional was that? And is it supposed to be a larger commentary, or is it just you know, something that was communicated that he kept.
Happy accident that works for the film.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I was watching it last night, and I think when I initially saw it when I was like a teenager, I didn't think deeply about like, what is this movie trying to say? I just sort of like liked it. And there's like so many great lines that me and my friends would like quote and just be like, on the run from Johnny Law, ain't no trip to Cleveland. And, you know, like, I'm Jerry and this is my associate Cornelius. Like, it was just like so many good lines that you can sort of rattle off. But I was thinking like this time around, beyond like all the quippy lines and the stuff that I remember as being like sort of like iconic to that movie, what it was trying to say. And I was, I didn't really like sort of grab onto a specific answer. So I was just kind of curious to hear what you thought. I mean, I do think a little bit like, this is kind of in Rushmore too, that like your imaginative, your fantasy world is so much more interesting than reality. And reality is like adult and boring. And when you're not someone who wants to like fit into the sort of like slots that society wants you to fit into, I think there is something that the movie's grappling with there. You know, like in that scene with Anthony and Dignan at the pool at Future Man's house, and that like his girlfriend is like talking to Anthony about how he went to the mental institution.
Yes.
And just sort of like you get this flash of them having gone to college and like, where's everyone going? And, you know, this person, you know, like what happened to this person and what happened to this person, and this person's a dentist now, or this person's whatever. And they're just these total outsiders to what everyone else sort of ended up doing with their lives.
Yeah, Dignan was so focused on being an outlaw that all he did was a landscaping gig that he got fired from.
Yeah.
It does speak to his commitment. It's just the wrong kind of commitment. He's just, and presumably he's wanted to do this since he was 8 or something, because he does have an incredibly I was going to say an unevolved, but it's really immature, right? He has an immature view of the way the world is supposed to work. And then every time we think that Anthony is the grown-up, he'll do something like draw Inez on a horse. And it's like, oh, you're a child. Of course you are.
Yeah. Yeah. All of them.
Yeah. But he's lucky enough to have Inez and maybe grow up.
Yeah. And it's also interesting that Inez is the only one with like, I'm thinking about who has jobs and like who's sort of like in the real world and like living their lives and taking responsibility for their lives. And I think Inez is the only person in that whole movie, and Rocky as well, who are. And everyone.
Well, I mean, Mr. Henry has a plan.
Mr. Henry has a plan,
his shit together.
He totally has his shit together. He's just an asshole about it.
Yeah. But he's being the kind of grown up that, weirdly enough, I don't think Dignan would want to be. Like, even though Dignan wants to rob people and steal stuff, I don't think he wants to hurt anyone. And Mr. Henry's actions are very, very personal. Yeah. You know, it's about betrayal and winning someone's trust, which is, you know, that's a successful con man.
Yeah. Mr. Henry is like kind of sociopathic, whereas Dignan is just like immature and caught in a like really limited fantasy version of life. Yeah.
And when you look at one of the criticisms that's leveled against Anderson's films over and over again is that he's not telling real, quote unquote, real stories, whatever those are. I like the metaphors he chooses, and I find them pretty moving sometimes, but I can sort of see where, if you track it all the way back to this, this is the kind of story he tells. He tells stories about people who aren't ready to grow up yet, or who aren't ready to be adults in the world. And when he does tell adult stories, they're Fantastic Mr. Fox or Isle of Dogs. Like they're abstracted to a way that he can deal with them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's really true.
Oh, that's a thesis.
Yeah. The theme of not being able to grow up in Wes Anderson's movies.
Unless you do it through playing with toys. And Life Aquatic, actually, with the stop motion monsters, it kind of does the same thing.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, I think I solved it.
You figured it out.
Certainly for my own development. It's a weird segue to make, though. You're currently working on a play which is going to be performed live, but also a radio play version of itself. And that in a weird way does feel kind of Andersonian. It does feel like you're creating an additional, a layer of remove from the material in order to tell it differently. Is that a deliberate pull from his films, or was there an influence there in any way? Because usually at the end of an episode, I ask whether or not someone has drawn inspiration from the film they've chosen, and I'm trying to figure out how it would work with Stupidhead, but I'm curious.
It's a tough bridge to sort of like cross.
No, you can always say no. People do.
I mean, I think if I were to say influence wise, or like what I might have taken from Bottle Rocket and put into Stupidhead, it would just be more the themes around like living in a fantasy. Like I think its creative content reflects more the influence of like living in a fantasy world and like wanting that world to be so real. Like I want to be a musical theater star, and so here's my weird show about that or whatever. Kind of like, like how Dignan sort of decides what he wants his life to be, despite the fact that that's kind of what's the word I'm looking for, kind of impossible, and he's not actually like equipped to create that successfully. But he's doing it anyways. I think that's where I can see like the links between like Bottle Rocket and that sort of like weird magic that I kind of wanted in Stupidhead, in terms of like the sort of form, doing this radio play. Like, in all honesty, it's just a way to like bring the show to make the show accessible in a global pandemic. and to like people who would like to come to the live version, but maybe like aren't able to for any number of reasons. So I feel like in terms of the radio version, and like, it will be interesting to sort of deal with, as you said, this like added limitation, because the show is really an intimate show that, has involved an audience, and there's lots of comedic elements. And so it'll be weird to not have like that feedback, that laughter. So I think like figuring out how that's going to sort of inform it and change it, and ideally make it even more intimate in some ways, like some of my favorite, and not that it's a podcast, but some of my favorite podcasts where you're like really listening to someone's, amazing story, like This American Life, or I don't know if you listen to Heavyweight, but I really like that podcast too.
I do. Yeah. And he listens to this, which is sort of great.
So cool.
I discovered he was a fan. And so, yeah, I think he'd appreciate this too.
This plug for
sure.
for him.
No, Heavyweight's great. And the phrase I was thinking of, or the term I was thinking of, was artifice. Like the radio play would put a layer of artifice between the audience and the listener in a way, and the performer in a way that could serve it really well.
Yeah. And I think, again, like we're trying to figure out exactly how that artifice will work with something that we also want to feel really intimate as well. And I think, maybe there's a way to have the artifice and the intimacy like interact in a way that I feel like it does in Bottle Rocket, like the honesty and the sort of the artifice, I think, work really well together in a very simple way in that movie that maybe I can sort of like take from and fuse into this radio play. But so I find like there's a sort of element of magic to Wes Anderson or Wes Anderson's films that I'm hoping to sort of like sprinkle into this somehow, like the whimsical aspects of it. Yeah.
Well, just make sure that the image you use for the playbill is symmetrical or perfectly balanced, and people will get it.
Yeah, totally.
My thanks to Katherine Cullen, who'll be spending the next 4 weeks remounting Stupidhead for Outside the March with co-creator and performer Britta Johnson, first as a series of live audio broadcasts starting tomorrow, Wednesday, July 7th, and then as live in-person performances bookable on porches and backyards in Toronto from July 20th to August 1st. Just look for Stupidhead at outsidethemarch.ca. Thanks also to Suzanne Cheriton. She knows what she did. You can find Katherine on Twitter at Katinka Cullen, all one word, KATINKACULLEN, and you can find Bottle Rocket on Blu-ray and DVD in the Criterion Collection. It's also available on Apple TV and Google Play, and streaming in Canada on Crave, Stars, and the CTV app. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting the Now What podcast, as well as writing the weekly Now streaming newsletter, to which you can still subscribe at nowtoronto.substack.com. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Stay home, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your shot if you can. I'll see you next time.